Autumn 1946, Central Texas. The Brazos River moved slow that season, swollen from late rains, the water the color of tarnished coins. For months, the old wooden bridge outside Larkspur had been out of use. The planks cracked, half collapsed into the current. Farmers drove the long way around. Wagons creaked through mud roads. And the town grumbled that the army took our men, the war took our steel, and the river took our bridge. One morning, a truck rolled in from the direction of Fort Griffin Camp, the former German POW compound now nearly empty. Only a handful of men remained, craftsmen kept behind to assist army engineers with post-war repairs. Among them was Heinrich Müller, a 31-year-old mason from Bremen. His English was halting, his hands thick-knuckled and scarred from both frost and factory work. He had been captured in Italy in 1944, shipped through New York to Texas, then assigned to maintenance crews when the war ended. Where most prisoners counted the days until repatriation, Heinrich had asked for one more job. A bridge, he told the camp commandant in May. Let me build something that stays. The officer laughed, thinking it sentiment. But when the Brazos washed out its crossing that summer, the army liaison remembered the offer. Now the townspeople watched the truck unload men in faded khaki trousers marked PW on the legs. They stood awkwardly on the riverbank while an army sergeant unrolled blueprints on the hood of a jeep. Beside him, Mayor Will Hollis adjusted his hat, suspicious of the idea that enemy hands might rebuild what war had already taken. Hollis's son had died in the Ardennes. He spoke in clipped syllables. They good with timber? Better with stone, the sergeant said. But stone'll outlast wood. Heinrich studied the river silently, measuring distances with his eyes. We start there, he said, pointing to a jut of limestone that could anchor the first pier. His voice carried a German accent but also certainty. The language of builders, not soldiers. The first days, they began work under watch of 2 guards and the entire curiosity of Larkspur. Children lingered on the ridge, whispering that the prisoners might try to escape across the water. Women from town came down pretending to pick wildflowers, but really to stare. Heinrich divided the men by trade. 2 carpenters, a welder, 1 surveyor who'd been an architect in civilian life. They built cofferdams, poured concrete from salvaged barrels, scavenged steel rods from dismantled barracks. By the 3rd week, the rhythm of labor replaced the awkwardness. Locals realized the men weren't drawing pay. They worked for rations and permission to sign their names on the final plans. One afternoon, a gust lifted a plank into the current. Without thinking, young Billy Hollis, the mayor's nephew, dashed toward it, slipped, and went under. The water was brown, fast and loud. Before anyone shouted twice, Heinrich dove in fully clothed. He came up downstream, pulling the boy by the collar. The crowd that had gathered broke into motion. Women screaming, guards shouting, the sergeant wading in to help drag both to shore. Billy coughed river water and looked up, wide-eyed, at the man who'd just saved him. Danke, Heinrich muttered. You are safe. You talk like my teacher, Billy gasped. Only slower. That evening the mayor came to the riverbank himself. The guards stiffened, expecting confrontation. Instead, he removed his hat. Müller, Hollis said quietly. You've got my thanks. Name your need. Only more nails, Heinrich smiled. Bridge is hungry. Small changes. After that day, the tension dissolved. Mrs. Hollis sent down pies. Local blacksmiths lent tools. Townsfolk began to refer to the crew not as prisoners, but as the bridge men. Every morning before sunrise, Heinrich walked the half-built span alone, checking joints, tapping stones for cracks. Sometimes he hummed, old Bremen folk songs that carried oddly across the water. By late October, 2 stone piers rose clear of the current. The army sergeant reported to headquarters that the work surpassed expectation. Yet what impressed him most wasn't the engineering. It was how the locals had begun bringing coffee and fried eggs to the site, sharing breakfast across what 6 months earlier had been barbed wire. Still, for Heinrich, the bridge was more than labor. Each blow of his hammer was atonement. In his tent, he kept a small photograph. His younger brother, dead somewhere near Stalingrad. We built bridges once in the fatherland, he had written in a letter never sent, but only to move armies. Here I build for peace. The storm in November, a cold front rolled across Texas. Rain hammered for 3 days, turning the site into a field of slick clay. On the 3rd night, the guards ordered everyone to halt work, fearing the supports would give way, but Heinrich refused to leave the scaffolding. Lightning flashed as he drove wedges into place, sealing the stone joints with cement by lantern light. The river was rising again, threatening to undo months of effort. The sergeant shouted up, Müller, Come down! If I go, bridge goes. They worked until dawn, ropes slipping through blistered hands. When the storm finally broke, the central arch still stood. The guards cheered despite themselves. And when sunlight returned, Larkspur saw something they would talk about for generations. German POWs standing shoulder to shoulder with American veterans, hauling the same ropes, saving the same structure. The following morning, the mayor posted a note on the sightboard. This bridge will be known as Friendship Crossing until a better name finds it. No one objected. Winter crept in without snow, just a thinner sunlight and a wind that cut through denim. The river slid lower after the storm, slate-colored and calm, as if embarrassed by what it had tried to do. On the first Monday of December, a courier from Fort Griffin arrived with a clipboard and a face too polite for the news he carried. Repatriation orders, he told the sergeant. Final transport in 14 days. Europe wants her sons back. The paper listed a dozen names in block caps. Heinrich Müller, Adler, Voigt, Kappel. The list made the men quiet. It made the town quiet too, in a way. People had gotten used to the rhythm of hammers and foreign vowels. They had gotten used to pies disappearing and returning as clean tins with Danke penciled underneath. They had not considered goodbyes. The sergeant found Heinrich on the scaffold, checking a ledger he kept in his pocket. Stone counts, nail counts, a map of the river and numbers. He read the order once. Then again, 14 days, the sergeant said. Bridge'll be near enough, but not done. Heinrich folded the paper and slid it inside the ledger. Then we will make the days heavy, he said. They made them heavy. From first light till the horn sounded at dusk, they worked as if a clock were chasing them down the planks. Ropes burned palms. Cement dust sat in eyebrows like frost. The carpenters, Ben and Otto, took to holding their measuring tape in their teeth when their hands were full, spitting out numbers in a comedy of accents that made the blacksmiths laugh. Even the guards passed buckets in a chain. At noon on the third day, Mrs. Hollis arrived with coffee. She set the tray down and surprised herself by scolding the men like a nurse. You, Mr. Müller, sit and drink before you fall off my bridge, she said. My bridge, said the mayor from behind her, amused. Our bridge, she corrected, and handed Heinrich a steaming cup. He took it with both hands. Frau Hollis, he said, careful. When we go, the work, who will finish? The army says a county crew can do rails and decking, the mayor said. But I don't want county hands guessing at your arches. Not arches, Heinrich said, tapping his cup. Lines. If lines are right, rails easy. Lines must sing. Then teach us to hear, said a voice, thin and shy. Everyone turned. It was Billy Hollis, hair sticking up under a cap, the boy the river had taken and given back. He had a schoolbook tucked under his arm and a pencil behind his ear. If you go, someone's got to know the song. Heinrich smiled in a way that showed the tired in his face. Come tonight, he said. We will make a class. They borrowed the church basement. Long tables, chalkboard with half-erased Bible verses, a coal stove that clanged sometimes like a bell tuning itself. Word went out via Mrs. Tate, the schoolteacher whose handwriting seemed to make even bad news gentler. By 7, a dozen townspeople had gathered. The blacksmith and his daughter, the feed store clerk, 2 farmers, a veteran with a cane, and Billy with eyes bright as river water in sun. The prisoners came with notebooks made from brown paper bags folded and stitched with twine. Welcome to, bridge school, Heinrich said, awkward and earnest as he picked up a piece of chalk. He drew the river as one long lazy S. He drew piers, rectangles with crosshatch for stone. He drew an arch as a curve that looked like a hill pressed upside down, a gravity map drawn like a smile. Then he wrote a single word in careful block letters, Brücke. This is German for bridge, he said. Brücke. You say it. Brücke, the group echoed, laughing at themselves softly. He circled the word. Bridge is not only stones and wood. Bridge is promise. He underlined promise as if it were a measurement. You must think of weight, of wind, of water angry in spring. You must think where each piece helps the others, and where one wrong piece makes all wrong. He spoke for an hour, toggling between broken English and the kind of mathematics a hand understands. He handed out a page with the span's measurements. 3 arches, 2 piers, limestone footings sealed with a mix he could recite like a recipe. 1 part cement, 2 sand, 2 crushed river gravel, and a prayer. He explained why the arches were slightly flattened. Texas floods like to push, not just lift, and a flatter curve took the shove. When he finished, the veteran with the cane, not old but older than war made a man, cleared his throat. What about names? He asked. A bridge in this county gets a plaque. Folks'll want to know who built it. The question floated there like a leaf on the current, spinning slowly as everyone watched it. The blacksmith's daughter spoke first. "We write the town," she said. "Larkspur, that's true." The veteran looked at Heinrich. "We write yours?" Heinrich studied the chalk dust on his fingers as if it might answer. His accent thickened with feeling. "Names are heavy," he said. "Heavier than stone. But sometimes weight is good, honest." The feed store clerk shifted. "I don't mind a German name if it stands for something decent," he said. "Plenty of our boys fought against Germans, but they also fought for a country where a deed stands above a flag." The room held its breath. The veteran nodded slowly. "Maybe we let the bridge decide," he said finally. "Let's finish it right. Then we see if it sings with his name on it." "Or," Billy blurted, "maybe the plaque says both." He flushed. "I mean, Americans and Germans, like a duet." Mrs. Tate scribbled that in her notebook like it was more than a child's idea. The word duet looked graceful in her hand. They ended with coffee that tasted like coal smoke, and pie that tasted like forgiveness pretending to be pecans. When the prisoners rose to leave, the church door opened on a slice of cold night and a shadow in a hat. Sheriff Cal Wilmer. He'd come to see for himself what people were whispering about. Foreigners teaching locals how to lift a county road over a river. "I hear we're building Germany a monument," he said. Not unkindly, but not kindly either. "A bridge," Mrs. Tate said with her schoolteacher voice that could correct a man twice her size. "For cattle and schoolchildren and funerals. The usual traffic of a town." Cal touched the brim of his hat. "Just minding that funerals don't start crossing it 'fore it's ready." Heinrich nodded. "We will mind." Outside, the sheriff's headlights washed over the church sign, catching a torn flyer half peeling from a nail. "Go back, enemy," someone had scrawled. The wind fluttered it like a cheap flag. Cal reached up, tore it down, and folded it into his pocket. He did not explain that to anyone. On the 7th day, trouble arrived before sunrise. A ladder left flush against the pier had been kicked free. The tool crib's padlock lay split on the mud. A sack of nails had been slit so they spilled sharp as teeth. And on the fresh mortar of the second arch, someone had gouged a cross with a knife. Not a holy cross. A narrow X meant to mark a target. The sergeant swore under his breath and made a show of counting rifles. But weapons weren't the wound. It was the insult to the work, the unmaking. "Boys will be fools," the blacksmith muttered. "Or men acting small as boys." Heinrich said nothing. He lifted the sack, salvaged what he could, and set the men to mending. At mid-morning, a truck pulled up in a grumble and a spray of gravel. 3 men in Sunday coats climbed down. The tallest had a jaw like an axe. He wore a pin on his lapel. VFW. "We respect the labor," he said. "Loud enough for anyone in 2 counties to hear. But we don't respect rewriting memory. Our dead don't get to come back and sign things." The mayor stepped forward. "Our dead get a town that isn't afraid to admit somebody helped build it. Those are different matters." The veteran with the cane limped forward, slow, stubborn. "I was in Hurtgen," he said. "Saw friends go down in trees that exploded like Christmas gone wrong. I am not made of forgiveness, but I know a bridge when I see one, and I know a gravestone. This," he gestured to the span, "ain't the second." The man with the pin looked past him to Heinrich. "What's this to you, German?" "Home," Heinrich said simply. "A thing I can leave that is not a problem." That answer stunned the men more than anger might have. They looked at each other, then at the river doing its indifferent work. The tallest spat in the dust. Not as an insult this time, just as a habit built from years where men didn't know what to do with their mouths when their minds changed. "You put the town first on the plaque," he said to the mayor at last. "Big letters. You keep his name small. You make sure no one forgets who fed him while he worked." Mrs. Hollis, who had come down with a thermos and a hand on her husband's sleeve, spoke without thinking. "No one forgets who saved my nephew," she said. "Names will reflect that too." The men left in a confusion of boots and pride. Work resumed as if labor itself were a way to vote. That night, the bridge school met again. This time more people came, curiosity growing like a plant toward light. Heinrich taught them how to test a stone by tapping it and listening for a dull thud, bad, or a bell-like ring, good. He showed how to sight along a plank and see the warp like a lie trying to wear a straight face. He wrote dead load and live load on the board, and the farmers nodded as if he were describing hay and then cattle on top of hay. After the lesson, the room became a small parliament. Plaque ideas were offered like biscuits. "Town first," said the feed store clerk. "Builder next." "Dates matter," said Mrs. Tate. "A bridge wants to be pinned to time." "Bible verse?" someone suggested, to murmurs of maybe. "Better a line a child can read," Mrs. Tate countered. "Bridges are for children more than for preachers. They will cross it longest." Billy held up his hand. "We could write the word twice," he said. his cheeks coloring with courage. Bridge and Brooke. People could learn something walking to school. No one laughed. The blacksmith's daughter grinned. A duet, she reminded them, and pointed at Mrs. Tate's earlier notes. When the room thinned, Heinrich stayed to erase the board. Chalk dust rose and fell like a soft weather. Mrs. Tate lingered, choosing her words as if they were nails and she had only so many. "Mr. Müller," she said, "if you had your way, what would the plaque say?" He looked at the empty board for a long moment. "It would say," he began slowly, "that a river is not a border. It is a place to meet." She wrote that down and underlined it twice. In her notebook, the line looked like a sentence testing its weight, finding it good. On the 10th day, a scaffold plank split with the sharp, wrong sound of wood making a decision against you. Otto fell 3 feet, caught a rope, slammed into a crossbeam, and howled. The guards froze, then moved. The sergeant swore something that sounded like a prayer with a broken leg. "Hold him," Heinrich said, voice suddenly doctor calm. He and the veteran with the cane stabilized Otto's arm with 2 pieces of clean scrap, a strip of torn shirt, and the kind of gentleness men rarely give each other in public. They lowered him like an offering. When Otto finally breathed easy, a hush fell. The plank that had split lay on the mud, grain open like a mouth. Heinrich knelt beside it and ran his fingers along the break. "Cheap," he said. "Dry on the outside, wet in the heart." He looked up at the blacksmith. "Your kiln?" "Hot as sin," the blacksmith answered. "But I didn't season that lumber. County rushed it." The mayor's mouth tightened. "I'll fetch better." "No." Heinrich shook his head. "We do with what we have, but we test twice. A tap, then a squeeze. A man shouldn't trust a board because it looks like a board." He took a pencil and wrote on the broken plank in big letters. "Look close." He propped it where everyone would see it coming on sight. It looked like a sermon nailed to a church door. The accident slowed them, but it also stitched them tighter. The veteran with the cane took charge of plank testing, knocking wood like a judge rapping for order. The blacksmith's daughter became a rope captain, checking knots with a fierceness that made grown men show her their work like schoolboys hoping to pass. On the 12th day, the sheriff returned, not with trouble, but with a man in a county truck and a stack of fresh purchased timber. "We can do better than do with what we have," Cal said, as if it cost him a little to say it. "Consider this an apology for whoever slit your nail sack." "Thank you," Heinrich said, with a nod that held both grace and the ordinary dignity of acceptance. They laid the new planks with a care that felt like ritual, each one placed, tapped, walked, and blessed with a boot heel. That evening, the town gathered on the east bank for what someone called a nearly finished. Nearly farewell. Someone strung a line of lanterns along the embankment, and their light made the river look like it was wearing jewelry. Mrs. Hollis brought a pot of chili. The feed store clerk surprised everyone by playing a harmonica without being asked. Children ran in packs, trailing laughter like ribbons. A carpenter from another town came to look. Craft respects craft, and stood quiet with his hat in his hands as if in church. The mayor cleared his throat and stepped up on a crate. "Folks," he said, "the bridge has 2 days more of sweat in it, and then a lifetime of dust. Before these men go, we ought to speak plain about how we remember the work." He took a folded paper from his pocket. "Here's a draft for a plaque. Hear it and say if it sits right." He read, "Friendship Crossing. Built by the people of Larkspur County with the hands of American veterans and German POW craftsmen. 1946. A bridge for cattle and schoolchildren for harvest and homecoming. May it carry more kindness than weight." He paused. "Below that we'd list names. Crew leads, stone foremen, carpenters, the county and army overseers. And," he looked at Heinrich, "Brooke in little letters for the music of it." Silence held for a heartbeat. Then the veteran with the cane nodded. The blacksmith's daughter whispered, "Yes." Mrs. Tate dabbed her eyes and didn't apologize. A shout came from the back. "Put the boy's name on too!" And laughter broke the hush like a good rain on a dry roof. "Which boy?" the mayor called, grinning. "The one who fell in and came back meaner." Someone hollered, and Billy took a little bow that made his ears go red. Heinrich stood apart, listening. He did not ask for his own name to be larger, for credit to be cleaner, for history to be shortened. He looked at the arches and their shadows on the water, and the shadows looked like bridges too, going somewhere no wagon could follow. He felt something in his chest loosen, the way a knot surrenders when you find the line that was meant to pull. Mrs. Tate slipped to his side with her notebook. "I wrote another line," she said quietly. "Not for the plaque, for the county paper." She showed him. "Some bridges are built over water, some between people. If we are lucky, One bridge learns to do both. He read it twice. Keep that, he said. It is true. The sheriff wandered over, hands hooked in his belt. Transport leaves at dawn day after tomorrow, he said to Heinrich, not quite meeting his eye. You'll go to Houston, then New Orleans, then a ship. I know, Heinrich said, not unkind. I will miss Texas. He searched for the right word. It's sky, Cal nodded, as if that satisfied something he hadn't known he was asking. Sky's fair to everybody, he said. It's the ground that makes trouble. On the 13th day, the final stones of the third arch went in like a sentence finding its period. The crew set a temporary plank walkway and let the town line up to cross one by one. Children first, then their mothers, because that is how emotion organizes a crowd when no one is giving orders. The blacksmith walked with the veteran, their steps strange and beautiful, the limp dictating the cadence, the strong leg matching it without comment. Heinrich crossed last. At the center, he stopped and looked both ways. Upstream, the water seemed to come from a place he would never see again. Downstream, it went where he could not follow. He closed his eyes and listened. He was not a poet, but even he could hear it now. The lines singing. Not loud, exactly as they should. He turned to the mayor. Tomorrow morning, he said. Before the truck, we set the plaque. At least it's stone. Words can be hammered later, but the stone should sleep in the place it will wake. Done, the mayor said. We'll meet you before the rooster knows he's got a job. That night, the church basement smelled of wet coats and goodbye. Bridge school convened one last time. Heinrich wrote the measurements on the board one final time. More for himself than for them. He underlined the mix ratios and circled the maintenance schedule. Inspect after floods. Replace planks that brag about being strong. Oil the rails to keep them honest. Listen after storms. Then he set the chalk down and faced the room. In Germany, he said, when a building is finished, sometimes we hang a wreath and we drink something strong and we try to laugh because we are sad. We are sad because finishing is a kind of leaving. He spread his hands. This is my wreath. He took from his ledger the folded page of repatriation orders, and with a carpenter's pencil, wrote across the blank back in his neat block letters. He did not hide as he wrote. He did not explain. When he was done, he handed the page to Mrs. Tate. For the plaque, he said. She read what he had written and pressed the paper to her chest like people do when something lands exactly where it was supposed to land all along. What did he write? Billy whispered, craning. You'll see tomorrow, she said, smiling through tears. But I promise you, you will like saying it out loud. Just before dawn on the 14th day, lanterns bobbed toward the east abutment like quiet stars. The plaque stone sat on a trestle, smooth-faced limestone, its skin pale and expectant. The blacksmith had made a frame for it. The veteran had polished the bolts with a cloth like a man polishing his father's watch. The town gathered in coats. Their breath showed. The river kept its own counsel. A hammer, a chisel, and the folded paper lay on the crate. Mr. Müller, the mayor said. You want to do the honors? Heinrich shook his head. This is Texas Bridge, he said. Texas hands should strike first. I will hold the stone. He stepped to the trestle and placed both palms on the cool face. The sheriff lifted the hammer. The veteran steadied the chisel. Mrs. Tate unfolded the paper and read, her voice clear and warm enough to make the lantern light seem brighter. No one argued. No one added. The words were right in the way a span is right when it both looks and feels like it will hold. The hammer rose. Across the river, a truck backfired. Dawn shift at the mill. Birds startled. Somewhere in the town, a baby cried and was comforted. The sheriff brought the hammer down, and the first letter sank into stone. By noon, the plaque would be seated. By evening, the transport would go. And by the time the moon walked itself over the Brazos, an entire county would know what the plaque said. The line that would make locals stop and touch the stone years later and remember the morning they were surprised by their own better selves. But for now, with the hammer and the chisel working like midwives, the bridge inhaled that last breath. All unfinished things take before they become the thing they were trying to be. The townspeople leaned in. The prisoners stood straighter. The letters gathered themselves from dust into meaning. Dawn rose pale over the Brazos, the kind of quiet, silver light that made even the trees look like they were holding their breath. The bridge stood complete except for its plaque, a single limestone slab waiting to be sealed into the center arch. Dew clung to the ropes, the planks, even the uniforms of the men who'd stayed awake through the night to polish every joint. The truck for Fort Griffin idled beyond the sycamores, exhaust curling into mist. Heinrich Müller stood beside it, coat buttoned, a small duffel at his boots. Inside were all he owned. One extra shirt, his ledger, and a folded photograph of a city that no longer looked like itself. The sergeant checked his watch. "Convoy leaves in 15, he said quietly. "You sure you don't want to ride first? I can have them set the plaque without you." Heinrich shook his head. "A builder leaves last." The dedication. The town gathered again. Farmers in their Sunday coats, children in wool hats. Mrs. Hollis with her pie tin balanced against the wind. A thin ribbon of fog lingered on the river like memory refusing to clear. Mayor Hollis stood on the plank ramp with his hat pressed to his chest. The sheriff, the sergeant, and 2 guards flanked him. Beside them stood Mrs. Tate, her notebook open, the folded page Heinrich had written the night before now resting between its leaves like a blessing. She read aloud. Her voice carried softly but steady, even over the river. "To all who cross, know that hands once enemies built this bridge together. Where hatred washed wood away, kindness laid stone. H. Müller, 1946. For a long heartbeat, nobody moved. You could hear the creak of the ropes, the sigh of the river, a crow calling somewhere upstream. Then the blacksmith let out a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, and said, 'Well, I'll be damned,' the crowd murmured. A few people clapped, then everyone did. Billy Hollis ran forward, tugging on Heinrich's sleeve. 'That's what you wrote, isn't it? You really put your name?' Heinrich smiled, a little embarrassed. 'Only so people remember it was possible.' The mayor took the hammer, the same one from the day before, and set the plaque in its frame. The veteran with the cane handed him a mallet for the final tap. The limestone clicked into place like a lock finding its key. When it was done, the mayor turned to the man who had once been his prisoner. 'Mr. Müller,' he said, 'I fought a war to keep men like you from winning. Never thought I'd thank one for what you've done here, but I will anyway.' He held out his hand. The crowd fell silent again, as if history itself were watching to see if the handshake would happen. Heinrich looked at the hand for a second, then took it. Firm, simple, no speeches. Mrs. Tate wrote later that the sound of that handshake was the sound of Texas beginning its peacetime. The departure. The truck engine rumbled to life. The German workers loaded their kits quietly. Heinrich lingered by the bridge rail, tracing the plaque with his fingertips. His calloused hand left a faint print on the fresh mortar, like a signature in dust. Billy jogged up, breathless. "Wait! I made you something." He pulled a small object from his pocket. A nail, bent into a crude loop, tied to a piece of twine. "It's part of the bridge," he said proudly. "That way you got a piece to take home." Heinrich knelt to the boy's height. "Danke, Billy. I will hang it in my house, if I ever have one again." "You will," Billy said, sure as sunrise. The sergeant called out, "Load up." Heinrich climbed into the back of the truck with the other men. The townspeople raised their hands, hats, anything, waving. As the truck pulled away, Billy ran beside it for a few yards. Heinrich reached out through the slats and touched his fingertips lightly, the way people do when neither can quite let go. Then the truck turned onto the main road. The bridge grew smaller, the crowd tinier, until both vanished into the shimmer of dust and distance. Across the ocean 6 weeks later, the ship SS Marine Panther docked in Bremerhaven. The air was colder, heavier, thick with coal smoke and rebuilding. Heinrich disembarked into a homeland he barely recognized. Bombed-out shells of warehouses, cranes swinging over ruins, street signs half gone. He found his sister in Bremen living above a bakery that had only one wall left from before the war. She barely recognized him. Thinner, older, sun-darkened from Texas. "Did they treat you well?" she asked over soup made from barley and hope. "Yes," he said. "Better than I deserved." He unpacked his duffel. Among the few things inside was the bent nail on its twine. He hung it by the window where the morning light caught it just so, making a tiny glint of silver each dawn. His sister noticed. "What is that?" "A promise," Heinrich said, "that men can build something better than fences." The years after in Texas, the bridge became just another part of the county's veins. Wagons crossed it first, then pickup trucks, then school buses. The planks were replaced twice, the paint 4 times, but the limestone arches never moved an inch. In 1956, a flood swept through Larkspur again. The river rose nearly to the arches, battering the supports for 2 straight days. When the water finally receded, the county engineer drove out expecting to find cracks. Instead, he found the bridge still sound. He wiped the mud off the plaque and read the inscription again. He later wrote in his report, "Müller's joints held. The stone did not yield." By the 1970s, locals had stopped calling it Friendship Crossing. The official county map simply labeled it Müller Bridge. No one remembered when that started. It just felt natural. Every spring, the school held a Bridge Day. Children walked across with paper flags and sandwiches. Their teachers read the inscription out loud in both English and German. Most of them didn't know who Heinrich Müller had been. Some thought he'd been a local engineer. But every time the words were read, the parents listening would fall quiet, remembering a story their grandparents had told about the German mason who built more than stone. The return summer, 1969, 23 years later, a dusty blue Volkswagen pulled off the county road and stopped near the Brazos. A man stepped out, his hair now gray at the edges, his hands still scarred. He leaned on the railing and looked down at the water. The bridge was exactly as he'd left it, except for a new coat of white paint and the hum of passing cars. Instead of wagons, Heinrich hadn't told anyone he was coming. He'd written once to Mrs. Tate years ago, and she had replied with a photograph of the schoolchildren's drawings of the bridge. But that was all. Now, standing here, he ran his fingers over the plaque. The letters were worn smooth by decades of hands. Moss filled the grooves, but the words were still legible. To all who cross, know that hands once enemies built this bridge together. Where hatred washed wood away, kindness laid stone. Below it, the county had added a new line in smaller letters. In memory of Heinrich Müller, 1915 to 1969, whose hands built peace, he smiled faintly. You shouldn't have done that, he murmured in German, but his voice trembled with pride. He took the bent nail from his pocket, the one Billy had given him, and set it down on the edge of the plaque. The twine was frayed, but the metal still held its shape. He sat on the stone rail for a long while, listening to the river. The same current that had once tried to steal the bridge now whispered beneath it. Patient, endless, forgiving. When the sun began to set, painting the arches in gold, a car pulled up behind him. An old Ford. A man stepped out, tall, weathered, maybe in his late 30s. Mr. Müller? The man asked. You don't remember me, do you? Heinrich turned. The man smiled. That same crooked, fearless smile from long ago. Billy Hollis, he said. The one who fell in the river. Heinrich laughed, surprised. You live here still? Never left. Sheriff now. My daddy passed a few years back. Mama too. But the bridge... He patted the railing. Still yours. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small folded photograph, yellowed with age. It showed the dedication day in 1946. The crowd, the plaque, the two men shaking hands. I keep it in my office, Billy said. When folks come in fighting about land or taxes, I point to it and tell them what you told my grandpa. That we build because bridges have to hold both sides. Heinrich's eyes softened. That was all I ever meant. They stood together a while longer, not needing words. The air smelled of cedar and riverweed, the same as it had the day it all began. As the first stars came out, Billy looked over and said, You know, Mr. Müller, it's funny. My boy's in high school now. He drives across this bridge every morning. Last week he came home talking about how they're learning German. Said his teacher told them Brücke means bridge. I thought you'd like that. Heinrich smiled faintly, his throat tightening. Yes, he whispered. Very much. Epilogue. That night, Billy drove Heinrich back to town, found him a room at the inn, and promised to meet for breakfast. But when he returned in the morning, the room was empty. Bed neatly made, the key on the desk. On the nightstand lay the bent nail, tied with new twine, and a note written in careful English. The bridge belongs to everyone now. HM. They never found where he went afterward, whether he returned to Germany or simply drifted elsewhere. But in the decades that followed, Müller Bridge became more than a crossing. Couples proposed there. Veterans gathered there on Memorial Day. Students painted it every spring as part of Bridge Week. And every child in Larkspur could recite the plaque by heart. To all who cross, know that hands once enemies built this bridge together. Where hatred washed wood away, kindness laid stone. Somewhere in Texas, when the wind blows just right over the river, the old limestone arches seem to hum. A faint tune, the kind of song bridges learn when they remember who built them.